The land stretched endlessly beneath a colorless sky, cracked and scorched by the sun. The wind offered no relief, only dust and silence. Amid this unforgiving landscape walked a thin, sunburnt boy, no older than 10. His name was Tommy, though no one had spoken it in weeks. His clothes hung loosely from his bony frame, torn at the sleeves and dust-stained at the knees. Hunger gnawed at his insides like a wild animal, relentless and sharp. Each step grew heavier than the last. His boots, too large for his feet, dragged against the earth as if weighed down by the past he carried. In one hand, he clutched a faded cloth sack inside it, the last remnants of food, a stale biscuit crumbling at the edges, and a small strip of dried meat, tougher than leather, but enough to survive another day. It was all he had left in the world. No home, no family, no name. Anyone remembered just this small sack and the will to keep walking. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. Not properly, not enough. The last town had turned him away. They always did. Too many mouths to feed, too few hearts left open. But Tommy pressed on. Somewhere beyond the hills, he believed, there had to be a place not touched by this kind of emptiness, a place where people still remembered kindness. Tommy's path led him toward a dried-up creek bed, its cracked bottom littered with brittle weeds and forgotten bones. The sun hung high and merciless, blurring the horizon and turning the dust into shimmering waves. He moved slower now, legs trembling, stomach hollow, when something unusual caught his eye. Half hidden among the tall brush near the creek's edge lay a man still, sunburned, and barely breathing. His shirt was stained with blood, and a bullet wound darkened his side. One arm stretched limply across the dirt, and the other clutched nothing but air. His canteen was empty, his hat missing, his horse nowhere in sight. Tommy hesitated, unsure whether the man was alive or dead. He had seen enough bodies on the trail to know what death looked like, but this was different. There was a shallow rise and fall in the man's chest, slow and fragile like a candle fighting wind. Whoever he was clinging to life by the thinnest thread. Instinct told Tommy to keep moving. He had nothing to spare, and giving up his only meal would mean surrendering his last hope of survival. But something deeper pushed back the voice of a boy who still believed that helping someone mattered, even if the world hadn't helped him. With trembling hands, Tommy opened the cloth sack. The biscuit, the strip of dried meat. It wasn't much, but to a dying man, it could mean everything. So in the middle of the wasteland, a starving boy gave what little he had, not knowing that the choice he made would change both of their lives forever. The sun dipped low behind the hills as the chill of night settled across the plains. The wounded man stirred, barely conscious, but alive, kept breathing by the food and water the boy had sacrificed. His body, though weak and battered, responded to the small mercy offered to him when no one else would have stopped. By morning, color had returned to the man's face. His eyes opened slowly, landing on the boy curled up beside the rocks, his small frame wrapped in a threadbare blanket, shivering from the cold. He understood instantly what had happened. The boy had saved him, a nameless child with nothing, who had given him everything. As the hours passed, the man began to recover. Bit by bit, he sat upright, drank from a makeshift pouch Tommy had refilled at a nearby puddle, and examined his wound. It was painful, but clean, a shot meant to kill. But fate had missed its mark. When he found the strength to speak, he asked the boy who he was and where he came from. Tommy, quiet but honest, told his story, the loss of his family in a wagon raid, the weeks wandering from one town to another, the hunger that never left him, and the hope he still carried despite it all. The man listened, and in those quiet moments between words, something shifted in him. He no longer saw a starving orphan. He saw a child with a kind heart, born into a brutal land, but unbroken by it. A child who had done more with nothing than most men ever did with everything. And in that realization, a bond began to form, not built on blood, but on survival, trust, and the kind of loyalty that only hardship can forge. As days passed, and the man regained his strength, he and Tommy continued their journey together, slowly making their way across the plains. The bond between them deepened, with each mile forged not just through shared hardship, but through unspoken understanding. One evening, as the fire crackled low and the stars lit the sky, the man finally shared the truth about who he was. He wasn't just an unlucky traveler. Years ago, he had served as a U.S. Marshal, once feared by outlaws across the frontier. His name had echoed in saloons and wanted posters. He'd brought justice to the lawless and dismantled one of the most dangerous gangs in the West. But that past had come with a cost. The gang hadn't forgotten him, and some had escaped justice. He had come back west to finish what he started, hoping to close the last chapter of a long and bloody tale. But he had been ambushed, shot, and left for dead by one of the very men he once put behind bars. The boy listened in silence, and though he couldn't fully grasp the weight of the man's past, he understood enough. This wasn't just any stranger. He had once been a symbol of justice, now fallen, forgotten, and alone. But through Tommy's act of kindness, something inside the old marshal had been reignited. He saw in Tommy a flicker of the good, that the West was losing courage without violence, generosity without reward. The kind of spirit that reminded him of his own son, who had died young many years ago, and in that moment he made a quiet vow to protect the boy, to teach him what he knew, and to give him what the world had taken: a purpose, a future, and a name that carried meaning. They arrived at a small border town days later, nestled between red cliffs and scattered brush. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions, just hard faces and harder lives. But for Tommy, it felt different. For the first time, he wasn't arriving alone. The man introduced the boy as his kin, and no one doubted it. Tommy, once nameless and hungry, now walked beside someone who stood tall and steady, with a hand on his shoulder and quiet pride in his eyes. Over the weeks that followed, the marshal, no longer running, took on a quieter life. He worked the land, repaired fences, and taught Tommy how to ride, shoot, read the stars, and listen for danger in the wind. But more than that, he gave the boy a home, a name, and a future. People in town began to whisper not of the boy's ragged past, but of the bond between them. Some said the old lawman had finally found peace. Others said the boy had saved him as much as he had saved the boy. Tommy's days of hunger and wandering faded behind him. He grew stronger, wiser, and more confident under the marshal's care. And in time, folks began calling him the marshal's son. But for the man himself, the title didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that a starving boy had once handed him his only meal, and in doing so had given him a reason to live again.